welcome everyone to, yes indeed, a nuclear bomb is going off behind me. The purpose of this video with this camera today is just to prove that sometimes I too am awake when the sun is up. So we're going to be keeping this video recording as proof that I am awake at 2 PM in the afternoon. Now, what we have to talk about for today is a couple of nerfs going on soon in this live version of WoW. Yes, for once we are not talking about nerfs to specs. We're not going to have to talk about specs and classes. We have to talk about bosses, because that is what gets nerfed for today, as well as an extra added nerf to one of the dungeons in Mythic Plus. Now, the dungeon in question is perhaps what you might have grown to know as the hardest dungeon to complete in general in this season of Mythic Plus, which is Azure Vaults. The numbers are also telling us the same thing. They are telling us that overall these are all of the best affixes for each of the keys, and you can see that even in the best affixes for Azure Vault, it is still the hardest to complete dungeon compared to all the rest. And even just our last week with Fortified, with Sanguine and with Volcanic, Azure Vault was, to no surprise, also the hardest dungeon to complete. So Blizzard took their time. It took them about 3 months to come up with some extra nerfs to Azure Vaults this time. The first nerf is the biggest one, more than the boss nerf. This nerf is the timer to complete Azure Vaults in Mythic Plus has been increased to 35 minutes and 30 seconds from 34. So you have an extra 90 seconds worth of time to complete the key. This was perhaps the biggest feeling people had when doing Azure Vault, the feeling that if you wiped even once, if you had to slow down even once, you were suddenly already fighting against the clock, you were already behind and having to catch up, which is something that not many other dungeons had as a feeling. The timer of Azure Vault was quite short, also considering the amount of trash you have to go through, the lengths you have to run throughout the dungeon. So this extra 90-second buff is quite a significant one for the key. We do have a couple more extra changes to Azure Vault. The first one is the cooldown of Vault Guard's Brilliant Scales has been increased. These, for the record, are the guys before the second boss, the guys who spam Ice Cutter on the tank, and Brilliant Scales was basically the passive buff they would put on themselves to reduce magic damage taken by 30%. So this one now being cast less often is going to make it easier for you to mow down these mobs if you are in particular a magical damage dealer. The change is not that huge. I think you have to kill only 6 of these mobs or 5 of these mobs throughout all of the routes you have to go for in Azure Vaults, so it's not huge, but it's an extra help. Talking about the room you are in where these mobs are nerfed, you also have the second boss. You have Azure Blade. Azure Blade also gets nerfed. Azure Blade's mana drains over 60 seconds instead of 50. Again, if you have no clue what this means, Azure Blade goes to the middle to regen her mana. So it took her 50 seconds to go back and start the intermission with the adds that you have to defeat. Now it's gonna take her 60 seconds before she goes back into the middle. This is perhaps because it kind of felt bad for DPS players, because they were busy having to dodge the orbs and then having to defeat the ad that was being spawned, and then back to the boss, do another round of ad, and then the boss was already leaving into the intermission. This leaves you a bit more time to defeat Azure Blade in her normal phase before she enters intermission. So if we just go by the current level of difficulties for the dungeons, it's a welcome change, the nerfs that come to Azure Vaults, which likely will bring Azure Vault more in line with the rest of the dungeons. Now on to the other part of the changes. We are talking about the nerfs to the raid boss, and the raid boss in question is none other than Raszageth, the last boss of Vault of the Incarnates. So we do have some nerfs that are going to be specific just for heroic, which is a flat 20% damage nerf to several of her abilities, Electric Lash, Volatile Current, Storm Surge, Absorb Shield, Damage Requirement, and Lingering Charge. All the damage done, or the damage required for the shield, has been reduced by 20%. This continues in the mythic version of Raszageth with some added effects. Primalist Stormseeker's Stormbolt also has 25% less damage in the mythic version. The fulminating charge, very important, the fulminating charge now snares players instead of rooting them in mythic difficulty. This is perhaps definitely the biggest mechanics changing feature. This is something that was going to create some problems in Phase 2 and some even bigger problems with the shrinking platform in Phase 3. So now you no longer have to coordinate your Blessing of Freedoms and your Tiger's Lusts to try to target the 3 players selected for this mechanic. Now these 3 players, many of the specs targeted by this fulminating charge now only being a snare, can deal with it themselves. Now, for example, many specs can also start simply running or start simply dashing away when they get fulminating charge, where they previously were not able to. They were rooted and they needed some sort of movement freedom effect to start running away. So this is going to make the second phase, and more importantly the last phase of Raszageth, much more manageable in terms of mechanic, on top of course of all of these damage nerfs happening to the boss. Especially some of the more dangerous, some of the more deadly mechanics. The dots left behind by the bombs are what could have caused some players to die, so much more manageable of a boss now. Talking about the boss herself, it's interesting because now we are almost just a few days after the 3 months mark into the season, into the mythic raiding and the raiding in general season. So I thought it was going to be interesting to see as an update how things have been going after 3 months in the raid compared to previous expansions. So the TLDR of how many guilds have defeated Raszageth in mythic difficulty compared to the previous raids. We can go back down to Shadowlands, even go all the way back down to BFA, just to compare how quick the progression has been so far this expansion. So where are we in comparison with Vault of the Incarnates? After 3 months, in Vault of the Incarnates, we have 365 guilds who have defeated Raszageth so far. So the overall is like a below average, a low-ish number. It's even lower when you compare it to the first raids of an expansion. If you compare it to Castonatria and if you compare it to Uldir, it's definitely on the low end of numbers. It's of course also a quite difficult last boss. Also, we are, as we always mention, in an expansion where Mythic Plus gear and upgrades from Mythic Plus have become stronger and stronger and stronger. We have gotten the addition of the Catalyst to make the lack of looting tier set from the raid much less important the deeper you go, because you can just get the tier set from the Catalyst. So there is even less reason for guilds to continue being super competitive in a mythic setting, in a mythic raid setting. And it will be interesting now to see how high the numbers will spike after this resets set of nerfs to Raszageth, which are quite significant. Maybe we will check. Maybe we will keep this image and then check a month from now, after a month worth of nerfs to Raszageth, to see if in comparison the progression of the kills on Raszageth has increased by a lot after this significant, I would say, help to defeating her with these nerfs. But for today, these were the only couple of nerfs. I guess the nerfs to the currently harder dungeon in Mythic Plus and the nerfs to the currently hardest boss in the raid. So Blizzard went on a pretty cynical route, just hitting the 2 hardest things for Mythic Plus and for the raid, We will see the effects these changes will have very soon, since these changes just went live with this reset and we don't have to wait any longer. So, with this, as the nuclear bomb is about to drop, I think it's time to leave. I have to go and say goodbye to my family. Thanks, of course, as usual, to all of the Patreon supporters for the help and the contribution to the growth of the channel. You can still support in other free ways, of course. You can like and comment down below on this video. You can subscribe to the channel itself. You can, as usual, follow me over on Twitter, as well as following me over on my stream on Twitch. Those are the helpful links for you to support myself and this channel, always as usual, completely for free. With this out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, likely, and in the meantime, that's it though. I don't like making videos when it's morning, plus there is all the light in the background. It's annoying. I don't get to show my beautiful self, so I'm not a fan.